I'd like to welcome you all to Princeton High School's auditorium. I'm Jessica Baxter, and I have the pleasure of being the principal of this wonderful school. Tonight we gather to discuss a very important and frightening topic, vaping, specifically teen vaping. 6 years ago, we had virtually no more cigarette smokers at the high school. It got to the point where it almost seemed odd if you saw somebody smoking out in public. Fast forward to today, and we have an epidemic in front of us that is affecting our adolescents. We have children and students who are addicted to nicotine and cannot stop vaping, or juuling as they call it. This evening's presentation and forum have been designed to help you understand what vaping is, the dangers of it, and what we can do to prevent teens from trying to begin with, and then also helping them to quit. Tonight is a result of efforts of our multiple community schools, JW, PHS, Hun, Stuart, and PDS, in conjunction with Cornerhouse, the Princeton Board of Health, and the Princeton Police. We bring you this informative session on vaping. And we also have two knowledgeable speakers, Kevin Schroth, an attorney for tobacco policy law, and Dr. Michael Steinberg from Rutgers Tobacco Dependency Program. Following their presentation, you'll have a panel discussion, and you will hear from Dr. George D. Ferdinando from the Princeton Board of Health, Reva Levy from Cornerhouse, Michelle Simborski from JW and PHS, Robert Masonis from Stuart, Mary Tony Shaw from Princeton Day School, and Jennifer Garrett from the Princeton Police. The audience will have the opportunity to ask questions, and I encourage you to speak up and seek answers so we can better support our children. And now I would like to introduce you to Kevin Schroth.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will get started. We have a lot of material, and it is an interesting, timely topic. Here's a little outline of what we're going to talk about, and I'll just jump right in. So before I move into electronic cigarettes, I just wanted to point out leading causes of preventable death in the United States on an annual basis. And you'll see that guns are about 38,000, opioids are about 63,000, alcohol about 88,000. All three of them combined total 189,000. And tobacco use, smoking, is more than double the total. So even though there's a lot of interest and focus on electronic cigarettes, deservedly, we cannot lose sight of the fact that tobacco use kills almost 500,000 people a year in the United States. So keeping data in perspective, I sometimes quote a philosopher, politician, one death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic, Joseph Stalin. Maybe not a philosopher, maybe not a politician. So, what are electronic cigarettes? They're sometimes known as ENDS. They basically involve using a battery to heat a liquid or gel that contains nicotine and other chemicals, including flavorings. And it is not just, even though we often are now using the verb vape, this is not just water vapor. And here's some pictures of various types of electronic cigarettes, including Juul in the lower right corner. There have been, by some measures, 3 different generations of electronic cigarettes. The earliest generation were often called cigalikes. They were designed to really look like cigarettes and try to mimic the feel of cigarettes. A second generation, the products became bigger, more powerful, more customizable. And as you can see from this slide, there's a whole wide variety of shapes, products that don't look anything like cigarettes. And then the third generation came, and this is really led by Juul. We're going to talk about that for a little bit. Juul is a small device, a sleek device, so it gets back to, it moves against like that second generation trend of larger, more powerful devices, but it doesn't look like a cigarette. It's clearly distinct, it's its own name. So the rise of Juul is really curious, and there's been some great reporting on this just recently. A few days ago in the New York Times and not long ago in the LA Times, there were great stories that described the origins of the company. And one of the really interesting things that has come out is that Juul And its founders and early workers studied tobacco industry documents going back into the 1980s, and even earlier in studying tobacco marketing. And that played a really influential role in how they designed their product. And the result was that Juul engineered what I call the most radical tobacco market disruptor in a century. And what happened a century ago was the cigarette became the dominant form of tobacco use in the country. Well, now Juul has really changed the landscape. And they did that by using technology, using nicotine salts. I'll talk about that in a minute. A sleek design. Juuls look a lot like a flash drive. They're small. Here's one in my hand right now. And marketing. And you can see some of the early marketing on the right hand of this side. A vaporized campaign was one of their early campaigns, and it used young, attractive, cool-looking people, and they used social media as well to spread their message in new and innovative ways, and the result was market domination. And not only has Juul done this, but now a new generation of copycats that are using this nicotine salt technology has emerged as well. So what is nicotine, and why is it so important when we're talking about like these nicotine salts? So it's a chemical, everybody here knows it's a chemical found in tobacco. You may not know that it's found in other plants, like eggplants, tomato, potatoes, basically families in the nightshade family. But tobacco has exponentially more nicotine than these other plants. One tobacco plant, which is probably half the size of a stalk of corn, could produce enough tobacco to make 5 packs of cigarettes. You would need over 2,000 pounds of eggplants to produce the same amount of nicotine that you'd get from one tobacco plant. It serves a purpose in nature. It's an insecticide. It protects tobacco leaves from bugs. It can be synthetic, but synthetic nicotine is commercially too expensive to be an issue at this point. And liquid nicotine can be hazardous. It can be poisonous to the touch or to be ingested. But focusing a little bit on nicotine salts and Juul. So Juul is unique for its small size. It uses relatively low wattage compared to some other e-cigarettes and less vapor, which contributes to it being a discrete product. It has high nicotine levels, partly because of these nicotine salts, which closely mimics the experience of smoking cigarettes. Juul's innovation also enabled them to create a smoother smoking experience or vaping experience, so that they've managed to deliver high levels of nicotine without delivering the bitterness that earlier generations of e-cigarettes would deliver if they had nicotine levels that high. So nicotine salts, again, it's actually a natural state of nicotine in tobacco leaves, and Juul specifically researched some science that R.J. Reynolds had been working on in the early 1980s that focused on how nicotine salts could lower the pH of the nicotine. And but Reynolds didn't use this discovery that they had developed and patented. And Juul came along and realized that there was an idea there that could be adapted to electronic cigarettes. And it changed the e-cigarette market dramatically. The slide behind me now shows how nicotine can be delivered into somebody's bloodstream very quickly, just like a cigarette. So within a matter of minutes, but either a cigarette or a Juul can give somebody the nicotine hit that keeps them coming back. And the other lines that do not have the sharp spike behind me are other types of tobacco delivery products, like smokeless tobacco and even nicotine replacement products. Here's another slide that also depicts the nicotine hit that you can get from a cigarette or Juul. And the blue line at the bottom here is actually other e-cigarette products, like first and second generation e-cigarette products. So I'm going to turn to marketing for a few minutes. One question that I would like you to ask yourself as you look at the next several slides is whether, well, I'm going to actually have an image of a tobacco industry slide, a historical tobacco industry slide, next to an electronic cigarette slide. And I want you to ask yourselves if these are advertisements, especially the e-cigarette ones, that are designed to try to attract adult smokers who are trying to quit. So here's one. We've got a historic tobacco picture ad on the left, and blue electronic cigarettes advertising themselves on the right. Now, this is an actor, and you can see that they're trying to capture this rugged sort of cool look. Here's another one, Camel cigarettes on the left, an electronic cigarette ad on the right, tobacco ad on the left, and Juul's vaporized ads on the right. And this was another slide that I wasn't getting to work, but it drives home the point that these are ads that are designed to not to help adult people quit, not to help people make the decision to use this product to try to quit. Their marketing was clearly designed to try to attract young consumers. Now, after Juul was faced with a lot of regulatory pressure, they started to change their ads pretty dramatically, and this is an example of that behind me, where they're trying to get older people in their ads. I'm going to talk about flavors for a few minutes. There's a lot of talk about what municipalities should do and what the FDA should do, and one point that people talk about a lot is flavors. Now, there is a role, I think, for regulating flavors in electronic cigarettes, but I don't think it should be the only policy idea that's on the table. So I think it's important to ask, did flavors spark the e-cigarette epidemic? And I think the answer is that it did not. It may have played a role. So youth use of e-cigarettes was declining between 2015 and 2016, and it really didn't even increase that much in 2017. Juul emerged on the market in a significant way in 2017, and by 2018, e-cigarette use was skyrocketing. So the products, including egregiously flavored electronic cigarettes, were on the market in 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and we did not see a spike in electronic cigarette use. There was an uptick, there was an increase, but Juul changed the game. Nicotine salts changed the game. So flavors are a factor in many decisions by youth who are considering using electronic cigarettes, but it's not the only factor. There's other factors too, including a lack of education. There's a significant amount of confusion over whether electronic cigarettes contain nicotine, whether they contain harmful or potentially harmful chemicals, whether they are water and flavors, or whether they are more than that. And now we are learning more and more that they are more than that. They do pose significant harms. And this number actually shows how electronic cigarette use has really, really spiked since 2017. And it actually shows also that smoking rates have continued to go down throughout the whole period of time, which again gets back to another public health concern that hasn't been borne out by the evidence yet, and that's that youth are going to use electronic cigarettes and then switch to smoking. We haven't really seen that yet. There's a little bit of mixed evidence that it's something that we should be concerned about, but the numbers show that they're pretty happy with their electronic cigarettes. Here's a similar slide. This is not showing prevalence, this is showing sales. And it's interesting because they follow a very similar trend. You can see the spike in youth electronic cigarette use coincides with Juul's market share. The line that is sharply spiked here is showing how Juul's market share is increasing up to over 70% of the market, while everybody else is on the decline. So, how are youth accessing their electronic cigarettes? The vast majority of them say that they're getting their electronic cigarettes from a friend. That's the bars on the left show over 70% of people in 8th, 9th, and 11th grade getting their cigarettes from friends. The middle bars show people getting them from a vape shop, significantly lower, a little bit more success for the older group than the younger two. And then bought them on the internet is relatively low. So that's still, again, that's an idea that is certainly a concern, but the numbers suggest that that's not a primary source. Now, we really, there's two crises right now related to electronic cigarettes. I'm focusing right now on youth use of electronic cigarettes, nicotine delivery products. The second crisis, which is pretty distinct, although there is a connection between them, relates to acute lung injuries that are primarily, almost exclusively, related to people using vaping products to vape THC, or marijuana or cannabis delivery experience. But the connection is notable. So CDC has reported that about 11% of teens that are using electronic cigarettes are also trying to use or using cannabis or THC in their electronic cigarettes. And how do they do it? Well, they can do it with Juul. It takes an internet search of about 3 to 5 seconds to find articles that will tell you, and even YouTube videos, that will tell you exactly how you can jigger your Juul delivery device in the pods to hold THC, or a THC-based oil. And that's where we've seen these acute lung injuries take place. And various other types of electronic cigarette devices, like the second generation devices, can also handle that type of THC products. So what do we want to do when it comes to regulating electronic cigarettes? Two of the big policy issues that we have to think about here is this a product? And there were a lot of people in the public health community were very excited and continue to be very excited about the promise held by electronic cigarettes, because it could be a safer way to get people to get their nicotine than cigarette smoking. Remember the slide from the beginning, almost 500,000 people die every year from cigarette smoking. It's the deadliest consumer product in the history of the world. It's not an exaggeration. So if you could get those people to use a less dangerous product, that could be a good thing. But, and the FDA and a lot of people were thinking about how to make that happen, but nobody really anticipated. As recently as 2016, the commissioner of the FDA did not anticipate an epidemic of youth use of electronic cigarettes. So when you try to balance the potential benefit to adult smokers against the harm to youth becoming addicted, and you look at the numbers of youth who are becoming addicted vastly outweighs the number of adults, or at least the percentage of adults who are using these products to quit. Data could change. One of the mantras in electronic cigarette research is we're studying this. We're trying to gather the data as quickly as we can and generate data as quickly as we can. And so this could change, but right now it looks like the potential harms are really substantial and outweigh the potential benefits to adults trying to quit. It doesn't mean that there might not be some way of threading the needle, but it's a difficult question and an interesting question. What can be done locally? There are a lot of things that local jurisdictions can do in places like Princeton and in places like the state of New Jersey. And there's even the potential for federal action, although recent news suggests that that might not happen very soon. Local jurisdictions have the authority to restrict and to prohibit the sale of flavored tobacco products and flavored electronic cigarettes. They have the ability to, I just jumped from 1 to 3, apologies. They have the ability to restrict the availability of retail licenses quite dramatically, and that can really change the profile of a town. You can crack down on retailers that are selling the product to people who are under the age of 18 or here 21. Retailers can be required to have specific cash registers that require the swiping of an ID before the cash register opens. We actually did some research this summer that found that retailers that have e-scan devices on their cash registers were far less likely to sell to people under the age of 21. And our study involved sending people under the age of 21 to try to make purchases. Tougher penalties and the revocation of licenses can also really restrict and change the market or the environment in a town. Banning menthol cigarettes is an important policy option. And I mentioned we're here to talk about electronic cigarettes, but it's really important that if you're going to ban flavored electronic tobacco products, you shouldn't leave flavored cigarettes on the market. So flavored cigarettes and flavored cigars should be prohibited as well. I think that a good flavored law acts in one fell swoop to get rid of all the flavored tobacco or e-cigarette products on the market in a given area. And as I mentioned, banning flavored electronic cigarettes can be part of a flavored bill, but probably shouldn't stand independently. Retail density laws could also prohibit the sale in places like pharmacies. They could require them to only be sold in places like specialty stores that have an age restriction so that you can't even walk in the store unless you're 21 years old. So that ends my portion of the presentation, and I'm going to hand the mic over to my friend and colleague here, Michael Steinberg. And I think we'll take questions after he's done.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I always have to adjust the microphone because I'm a lot shorter, but nothing I can do about that. So thank you very much for having us here. It's really obviously not a pleasure to be here for the topic, but it's great to share our information with you. So I'm, both Kevin and I are up at Rutgers. I'm at Robert Wood Johnson Medical School. I'm the chief of internal medicine and also run the Rutgers Tobacco Dependence Program. So we run a program that for the past 19 years offers face-to-face treatment and group treatment for treatment of all tobacco products, including electronic devices. So at the end of the talk, I'm going to talk about treatment resources that are available here in New Jersey locally. First, I want to talk a little bit about addiction and nicotine. So Kevin gave us a good background on what nicotine is and where it comes from. I want to talk about the effects of nicotine on the brain. So nicotine is the chemical, as you're all aware, in tobacco products that cause them to be addictive. The nicotine affects the brain pathway that is shared by many other substances of abuse. So you see the common pathway in the brain, this part of the brain, for those of you who are interested in neuroscience, I know there's plenty of you out there. The nucleus accumbens, the ventral tegmental area of the brain, is where this reward pathway happens, and it's shared by other substances like opiates, alcohol, and cocaine, along with nicotine. And the main neurotransmitter that's involved with nicotine's effects on the brain is dopamine. So when you think about the rewarding effects of nicotine, no matter what product you get it from, it's mediated through dopamine. It's the dopamine release in the brain that causes the rewarding effects. And it's also nicotine withdrawal that happens that keeps people using these products. And when you think about how addictive some of the substances are in our society, by one measure is how many people who ever try a substance become long-term users. And when you use that as a definition, you see that nearly 1 out of 3 people who ever try smoking a cigarette become addicted to cigarettes. So in that sense, tobacco is the most addictive substance in our society, certainly the most addictive legal substance in our society, more addictive than heroin, cocaine, and alcohol. I think it's important to talk about the addictive piece because, as Kevin mentioned, a lot of the electronic devices, such as Juul, have become so popular, and it's not surprising that they are able to deliver high doses of nicotine, practically the same levels as people get from their cigarettes. And that might explain why they're so commonly used and why it's difficult for people to stop using them. So I want to talk a little bit about the health effects of these products. So it's not, as Kevin had pointed out with the marketing, it's not hard to understand why some of these electronic devices appeal to young people. They come in lots of different flavors, lots of different colors. There's e-hookahs, there's vape pens, there's all kinds of these different products, and I think they appeal to a wide variety of young people. I always like to talk, Kevin mentioned the flavorings and how the flavorings play a key role in the use of electronic devices. When I give this talk to other physicians, I'm usually sitting in an audience, and there's pulmonologists who specialize in treating lung disease, and there's gastroenterologists who specialize in gastrointestinal problems. And the gastroenterologists say, they say to their pulmonary colleagues, see, I told you the gut is much stronger than the lungs. And it was kind of funny. This was actually during a talk I gave a couple years ago. But it's actually true that our digestive systems are built to withstand very hostile environments. So the acid in our stomachs, very high acid content. It's just those tissues are built to withstand a lot of adversity. The lung tissues, on the other hand, are very sensitive. They're not designed to handle toxins and chemicals. So you have to keep in mind at a basic level, the flavorings that are in these products were not designed to be inhaled. They were designed to be ingested. So even the simple modality of how you're getting this product, this chemical into your body, can affect how dangerous and how harmful it can be. So the same chemical that, if you eat it and swallow it, is perfectly harmless, can be very dangerous if inhaled. And that's what we see with some of these flavorings. In fact, I was at a meeting a couple of years ago, a tobacco research meeting, and there was a poster there describing how different flavors of electronic devices were more or less toxic. So just so you know, if you're going to use e-cigarettes, you want to avoid cherry flavored because they seem to be the most harmful. We have no idea why. People talk about, you might have heard the term popcorn lung. You hear a lot of terminology around lung disease, around vape products. Popcorn lung actually comes from a specific chemical, which is a flavoring that gives you that popcorn flavor. It's also seen if people get this type of lung disease who worked around the manufacturing of popcorn. But if you get like butter popcorn jelly beans, it's this diacetyl that's the flavoring, and it's this flavoring that can lead to this bronchiolitis obliterans, which is a type of lung disease. In terms of other chemicals in e-cigarette vapor, so nicotine we've talked about, the amount of nicotine that's delivered by these products, the variety of products that Kevin went over, is highly variable. So if you look at, as he mentioned, if you look at the first generation, these Ciga-likes, the disposable blue type products, they tend to deliver very low levels of nicotine and tend to be less addictive. As you move into the second generation and clearly into the third generation products like Juul, the amount of nicotine that's delivered is on par with what somebody can get from their cigarettes. There are other chemicals in e-cigarette aerosol, formaldehyde, acrolein, heavy metals, things that you don't want to be putting into your body and can cause health effects. I know this slide's probably way too small for you to see, but what it shows is a chemical called tobacco-specific nitrosamines. It's a chemical that can lead to cancer, and you can see, or not see, point out to you that in yellow, the amount of this toxin that's found in nicotine replacement products, like nicotine patches, is very low, like two parts per, actually this is 2, I think, nanograms per milliliter. E-cigarettes are kind of in the range of 10, okay? But in cigarette smoke, you see these chemicals in the thousands. So although it's true that e-cigarette aerosol contains the same types of chemicals that are found in tobacco smoke, like formaldehyde, like tobacco-specific nitrosamines, the amount of these chemicals that are found in e-cigarette aerosol is much, much lower than seen in cigarette smoke. And I think it's very important not only for us to talk about the potential health problems of e-cigarettes, but it's probably more importantly to give a realistic and a factual-based estimate of these harms. So it's important for people to know that compared to combusted tobacco, like cigarettes, the amount of these chemicals in e-cigarettes is much, much lower. So obviously, unless you've been asleep for the past few months, you've heard about e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury, or EVALI. And the Center for Disease Control has come out with updates on EVALI about once a week probably. So it's hard to actually have an updated slide because the numbers keep changing. And this really is a health condition that is changing day to day and week to week. The New Jersey State Department of Health is monitoring these cases here in New Jersey. They're using their epidemiologic department to look into them. So just to give you a snapshot of some of the information as of, I guess last week, November 20th, about 2,300 cases of lung injury related to vaping or e-cigarettes. The median age of people who came down with this condition was 24, but the range was from age 13 up to age 78. There are 47 deaths in the United States from EVALI. Again, the median age about 53, but ranging from 17 to 75. The latest findings suggest that products containing THC, as Kevin had suggested, these products can be used for, particularly those obtained off the street or from informal sources, meaning getting them from somebody else, getting them through the black market, not the commercially purchased devices. It's these other products that have been bought or given to other people that have been often manipulated and modified, seem to be the types of products that are leading to the overwhelming majority of these cases. Despite us learning more and more every week, there is no precise cause for what's linking these products to this disease. So no single compound or ingredient has been linked to all of these cases. However, the majority have been linked to THC, and THC that's been combined with vitamin E acetate, which is implicated in many of these. And then there's other health effects that can be related to e-cigarettes that we don't always think about. This one is one of my favorites. So obviously you're not allowed to bring your electronic devices on airplanes anymore because they've been shown to explode and do all kinds of things. Okay, I want to take 2 minutes to talk about the National Academy of Sciences report. So again, I think it's very important that we stick to the data and the evidence that we have. Even though we don't have all the answers right now, it's important that we do share what the answers, what scientific information we do have out there. So the National Academy of Sciences put out a report in 2018 which summarized all of the evidence that we had to date at the end of 2017. So again, it's already about a year old, but up until then, there were 800 studies that were reviewed by this panel, and not only did they make recommendations, but also gave us an idea of how strong the evidence was to make those recommendations. So I just want to go through a few of these that might be of interest to you. So there's conclusive evidence that the nicotine delivery from e-cigarettes is highly variable. We've already talked about that. And there's substantial evidence that that level of nicotine can be comparable to that seen from cigarettes. There are potentially toxic substances. However, the level of these substances are significantly lower than seen in combusted tobacco products. E-cigarette aerosols can induce acute endothelial dysfunction. The endothelium is a fancy term for the lining of blood vessels in your body. So it can cause damage potentially it can cause damage to the lining of the blood vessels. It can provoke oxidative stress, which again, that inflammatory response can lead to cardiovascular and other vascular disease. However, we don't yet have evidence that links electronic cigarette devices to clinical cardiovascular outcomes in humans. It's just too early for us to be able to say e-cigarettes lead to heart attacks or stroke. Okay, but the precursors are there to suggest that risk. There's no available evidence that e-cigarette use is associated with cancer endpoints in humans. However, The chemicals, as I talked about, that are found in e-cigarette aerosols do cause DNA damage. So again, the building blocks to make a case that e-cigarettes could increase risk of cancer are there, but we don't yet have evidence that proves that e-cigarettes lead to cancer in humans. There's no available evidence that e-cigarettes cause respiratory disease in humans. And again, when they say respiratory disease, they weren't thinking ahead to EVALI. They were thinking about the traditional respiratory diseases that we see with tobacco smoking, like emphysema, COPD, things like that. So we don't yet know that e-cigarettes lead to emphysema. However, there's a good amount of evidence that especially in young people, adolescents who use e-cigarettes, they may increase their pulmonary symptoms, like coughing and wheezing, and may increase things like asthma exacerbations. So we know that anytime you inhale an aerosol with toxins and chemicals in it, it's going to lead to a reaction in the airways. There's conclusive evidence that e-cigarettes can explode and cause burns, obviously not a good thing. And there's also conclusive evidence, Kevin mentioned that nicotine itself can be toxic if you ingest it or get it on your skin. And the same thing can be said with e-liquids. E-liquids that are ingested or placed on the skin can cause toxic effects. And we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of calls to poison control in toddlers and young children getting into vials of e-cigarette liquid and drinking it. And it's not surprising, right? You've got a bright red, cherry-smelling, cherry-flavored liquid. It's not surprising to think that a toddler could be attracted to that. In terms of harm reduction, and we, for time's sake, we don't really spend a lot of time talking about harm reduction, but this is the concept of, not all tobacco products are equally harmful, and we have to recognize that. It used to be much easier when I first started getting into the business of tobacco treatment. It was a much easier time. All tobacco bad, no tobacco good, end of story. And now it is getting more complicated as we have some products that may be more or less harmful than others. So there's conclusive evidence that if you had a current adult cigarette smoker and they were able to switch completely to electronic cigarettes, they're reducing their individual harm significantly. Now this just speaks of a person who is an adult cigarette smoker who switches completely, doesn't dual use the products, and it doesn't speak to the public health concerns that we've been talking about young people beginning to use electronic devices. There's substantial evidence that switching can reduce short-term health effects, but there is no available evidence yet as to what the long-term health consequences of these cigarettes are. We just don't know. These products have only been around for a short time. We don't know what the long-term health effects are. The other question that comes up, and Kevin had mentioned, the hope was that these products could act as a less harmful substitute for adult cigarette smokers to switch to. So the question is, how good are these products for cigarette smoking cessation? And there is substantial evidence that, and this is the point that Kevin made, that there's some mixed evidence as to whether e-cigarettes are a gateway to leading to smoking down the road. And even though, when we think about nicotine addiction, and we think about these products and young people becoming addicted to nicotine, it's a common sense concern to be worried that you could go from this product to a much more harmful product over here, namely cigarettes and combustible tobacco. But we really don't see the evidence for that quite yet. We're concerned about it. We're certainly looking for those kind of patterns, but the evidence doesn't seem to be that young people are going from e-cigarettes to cigarettes. What we do find, and what's pointed out in this report, is that if you're a young person and you use an e-cigarette, you're also more likely to use other tobacco products like cigarettes or cigars. It doesn't mean that you started with an e-cigarette and ended up with a cigar or cigarette, but that the point is probably if you're experimenting with one tobacco product, you're probably more likely to also use other tobacco products. And that's the evidence that we have to date. There is insufficient evidence that e-cigarettes are effective smoking cessation aids. So we're not recommending e-cigarettes as a tool for people to quit smoking. I will show you one study that was published that looked at e-cigarettes for that purpose. So this is a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine this past year that randomized e-cigarettes. This was out of the UK. It randomized e-cigarettes and nicotine replacement. So half the people got nicotine replacement products, which were covered by the Public Health Service, and half of them got e-cigarettes. And they followed people for up to a year. And what they found, again, I know this is too small, but what you see is at 1 year, the abstinence rates for cigarette smoking were 18% in the e-cigarette group and were about 10% in the nicotine replacement group. So you might look at that and say, well, e-cigarettes are more effective than nicotine replacement. There are some limitations to this study. One of the things was, even though the cessation rates in the e-cigarette group were higher, people more often than not continue to use the e-cigarettes up through that 1 year period. So if you look down here to, if you can see this, probably not. Yes, okay, good. So among those who are abstinent, 80% of people who were assigned to the who were randomized to the e-cigarette group were still using e-cigarettes at 1 year, compared to only about 9% of people in the nicotine replacement group. So, you know, the other caveats are, again, we don't know what the health effects of e-cigarettes are, so we're not recommending them as a tobacco treatment, because we know that nicotine replacement is effective as well as safe. The other thing is, we don't, you know, people think about e-cigarettes, well, they might be as good as the medications we use, but they're not covered by insurance, and these products are not inexpensive, so there's a limit in terms of how effective they might be. So in summary, the research is expanding exponentially around e-cigarettes. We don't know that these are safe products. There's no evidence that they're safe products. I think when people talk about vaping, they kind of attribute that to like water vapor. So they think, oh, it's just water vapor. How dangerous could that be? That's why the CDCs recommend that we use kind of a term like e-cigarette aerosol as opposed to vape, because it just sounds scarier. Aerosol sounds more chemically than vaping. There is no carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is a chemical that's produced when you burn things. There is no burning of tobacco with electronic devices. There is no carbon monoxide present. We also don't know what the second-hand effect of being exposed to e-cigarette aerosol is. So having somebody using an e-cigarette device or a vape device around you, we don't know what those health effects are. It's an unregulated product. We don't know what's really found in them. We don't know how much nicotine is being delivered by them, because they are currently not regulated by the FDA, even though the FDA has the authority to regulate them. In the future, and then all the public health concerns we talked about. Could this be a gateway? Is it renormalizing smoking behavior? Could it discourage people from quitting smoking by offering an alternative? What's the health effect of dual use of these products? And then finally, keeping in mind that the majority of, especially the first generation products and Juul, the majority of those products are owned either wholly or partially by cigarette companies. So what is their motivation behind that? So I'm just going to finish up with some treatment resources. So the State Department of Health actually, for about the past year, has now funded 10 tobacco treatment specialty programs throughout the state. These are the counties that these programs are found in. In Mercer County, which I believe we're in, unfortunately, the program that's that's set up in Mercer County is down in Hamilton at Robert Wood Johnson Hamilton, so it's a little further away. But these programs are throughout New Jersey, and there are resources available. There's also a website, the tobaccofreenj.com is a website that's also funded through the Department of Health and can offer some very interesting and good information. There's a grantee through the Department of Health who is funded to work with schools in particular in talking about curricula around vaping and e-cigarettes. So you can check out that website for that information. And then finally, if anybody is willing to make the trip up to New Brunswick, we're happy to talk to you. And anybody who's interested in tobacco treatment resources, we're available at the medical school. So I will end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that great information. As the panel makes its way up, the panel's going to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their perspective, their different roles in this town, in the schools. Once they're done introducing themselves, we can ask some questions. I'll be walking around, I'll have a microphone, so just raise your hand if you want to ask a question, either to the panel, or I think our speakers are going to stay for a little bit as well. So, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Officer Jen Gearing from the Princeton Police Department, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have from on the local police department level and some of the state laws that we have, as well as local municipal ordinances.
Hi, my name is Michelle Saborski. I'm the Student Assistance Counselor for JW in Princeton High School.
Hi, I'm Robert Basonis. I'm the Assistant Head of School for Academic Affairs at Stuart Day School of the Sacred Heart.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Maritoni Shah. I'm the medical director, practicing pediatrician in the area. I'm also the director of wellness at the Princeton Day School.
Hi, I'm George DiFerdinando. I'm a retired general internist, and the past 10 years I've been on the Princeton Board of Health, and for much of that time I've been the chair of that Board of Health.
Good evening, my name is Riva Levy and I work at Cornerhouse, which is a comprehensive outpatient treatment center. Specifically, I coordinate the prevention programs and I work with the teams in the area. So, right now, this is a great opportunity for everyone here in the audience to ask questions. The questions could be to the panel, also to our presenters. We have great resources here, and hopefully you'll take advantage of who we have here. Who's going to be the brave one that is going to ask the first question?
I have a question, now it seems first speaker mentioned that the use of e-cigs or ends by students are not an externality of the marketing effort, right? They were targeted. Are any of at least the three representatives that are up there from the schools, are you teaching teachers or educating them on how to identify the different products that are mastered, camouflaging e-cigarettes? I've seen things like, not personally, but I've read about them, pens, highlighters, watches, hoodies, backpacks that have built-in e-cigarette delivery devices or nicotine delivery devices. Is any of that happening, maybe even with the help of our representative from Princeton Police Department?
Well, last year there was a program, Hidden in Plain Sight, that did actually address the different places in a bedroom and the latest technology of hiding certain, whether it's e-cigarettes, substances, drugs, alcohol. So the message is out there as best as we can get it out, as parents and teachers and students are attending programs, reading articles that we do send out through the Facebook and other emails.
Yes, that's a wonderful question. We're still learning, we're still finding things and saying, hey, look at this. And yeah, I've personally gone out to at least 2 of the schools to talk to not only the staff, but also the students. And we're showing them what we're finding. We're showing even like the resident life at some of the boarding schools and some of the administrators here at the different high schools, what to look for. But again, the fads and the technology are moving faster, so we're kind of a little bit behind the 8 ball, but we do try to educate as much as we possibly can about what we're seeing and what everyone should be looking for and bringing that directly to the schools.
Good evening, and thanks for a very informative presentation. This question is more directed to Mr. Schroff, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. By the way, my name is Dwayne Williamson, a councilman here in Princeton. You had a slide up there about how teens access e-cigarettes and vaping devices, and the largest one was, I think it was over 70% is getting it from my friends as opposed to off the internet or buying them at the retailers. I'm just wondering what the breakdown is from getting it from my friends. Like, where are the friends getting them from? Are they like older friends who are over 21 who's buying them, etc.? I just wonder if you can just shed some light on a breakdown of where the friends are getting, that 70% are getting theirs from.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have more data than that related to that particular topic, but just from what I know generally, it's most often people buying from older friends or relatives purchasing and sharing. Two other points on that, and here we are 20 minutes away from the border of Pennsylvania. One thing that's not uncommon, and I've run into this in other districts close to a border, you have to be 18 to purchase in Pennsylvania. So if somebody's has a car and is enterprising, they can go to Pennsylvania, buy a fair volume of product and bring it back and sell it to their classmates or friends. So that's one idea. One other thing that I have read about is people using social media to advertise their products and posting something on social media like, just picked up a stash of Jewel, meet me at such and such place, and people respond to things like that. So it's you know, from an enforcement perspective, that's really difficult to deal with because it can happen quickly and products can be purchased and distributed in ways that are difficult to know what's happening or to sort of track it and see if there's any enforcement mechanism that could possibly be used.
I'm going to comment on that to try to give some perspective on what's going on in the local area. So we don't have a precise notion of tobacco use in our population, in our schools, but let's remember that when we're talking about in our schools, we mean in our community. The schools are a convenient place to enumerate our students, but they're not the place that the students live. It's a place where the students congregate, and I make that point to turn it back on us parents to a reasonable extent. So nationally, the most recent youth tobacco survey said that 27% of high school students, 27% of high school students are routine tobacco users of some type. As I go around Princeton and talk to parents, many of the parents feel challenged or challenge me on that proportion. And we have enough scientists here in Princeton that they'll go, how do you know exactly that that number applies to Princeton youngsters? I'm not exactly sure your data survey is correct. I don't believe that 27% of our youth are using tobacco. We actually, in the Board of Health, the other board members feel the same way. We believe that that's a reasonable estimate of high school age students in Princeton using tobacco products, 27%. So that would be the first number to me as a parent that you would want to have in your head. Okay? A quarter of the students are using, and the majority of that tobacco use at this point is not combustible tobacco, it is e-cigarette tobacco. Middle school use, it approaches 8%. That's a number that I get challenged on even more by parents. 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, the proportion of age group 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in Princeton is close to 10% of those students. So again, parents say, I just don't believe that my 10-year-old, my 11-year-old, my 12-year-old, I don't believe that that number applies to my child. I'm like, okay, fine, it doesn't apply to your child, but if there are 10 kids, one of those kids is a routine tobacco user, most likely in Princeton. So to me, you've got to wrap your brain around those numbers if you want to think about the problem that we have in our town. And I don't want to either absolve or blame the schools, but it's a parental and it's a societal problem to attempt to deal with that proportion of youngsters. The second point is an anecdote. I go to a public health meeting that is held at the South Brunswick Municipal Building, which people may know. It's across from a little mini mall there. And I pick up their version of Town Topics. And about 2 months ago, I was picking up their version of Town Topics. This speaks to the issue of distribution. And it discussed a sting that occurred in their town. This is not to victimize or to paint South Brunswick, but they happen to have the sting in their town where a 17 and an 18-year-old were selling e-cigarettes and e-marijuana cartridges that they had purchased over the internet that they were distributing to a 15 and 14-year-old and they had all connected via WhatsApp. And somebody had figured out, it's not exactly clear how it was figured out, but it turned into a sting operation. So I'm not even blaming in that case, 14, 15, 17, and 18-year-olds. It's more, if you want to know what's going on in terms of distribution, I think of these as these various jewels. Our students now own delivery vehicles. So the likelihood is your student either owns one of these, your youngster either owns one of these, they certainly know somebody who owns one of these. So then the question is, are they buying the quote-unquote app? Are they buying the cartridge to activate this? And you as parents have to figure out how to deliver this risk message to your student in a way that it'll help them get through this risky period without having vape associated lung illness or some other bad outcome. Because we all know that as people age and get out of the risk years, it turns out that the risky behaviors most of the time lessen to a certain extent. So we're here to try to help our students get through these risky periods of experimentation without being severely damaged. So those numbers, the availability of these vapes, and the fact that the illicit materials, which have a strong association but not a proof association with and vape-associated lung illness, are available to our students. It's no mystery that they can get them.
I also want to thank the panelists and the speakers for coming here tonight. My question kind of dovetails off what the doctor was just saying, which is, thinking of kids buying things on the internet. That's kind of tough at the municipal level to do anything about. But it seems like, and I was surprised to hear that there is a significant number of sales to minors, which you would think that's pretty low-hanging fruit. And then, you talked about the sting operation. It seems like there's got to be a way to address that. I'm wondering if Officer Daring or anybody else might have ideas about what we can do in Princeton to limit those points of access.
Well, I think I liken it to minors getting alcohol, right? They all seem to find a way to get it. But what we can do, some of the points that you made on your slide as far as the retailers, if you think about some of the retailers that we have in our town, they're pretty well regulated. We have the Wawa, we have the 7-Eleven, and then we have some of the mom and pop shop type bodegas, delis, Speedy Mart type thing. And we have a good relationship for the most part with all of those small mom and pop type places. Specifically Speedy Mart, we were there, we said, you have to pull certain products, and they did. Because they didn't want the state or the feds coming in and enforcing it, so they did it as a courtesy to us. As far as the corporate, sellers, they're very good about that because, they have their own guidelines that they have to follow. I think what we're seeing again is the kind of underhanded way that the minors are getting these e-cigarettes and vape devices. And again, it's through social media, it's through one person knowing someone, someone having a stash of it. So it is a little bit more difficult to enforce it, obviously, that way. But as far as the sellers in this town, I think that's not as big as an issue as it is maybe in a bigger town like South Brunswick, where you go down the Route 1 corridor and there seems to be a vape shop every, few miles or so. There's always work to be done, but as far as the retailers here, it's I don't think that's where the problem lies. I think it's more
And let me speak to that one also, because 2.5 years ago, the Board of Health passed a e-cigarette ordinance in Princeton. It turns out that e-cigarettes at the moment are not regulated either on the state nor the federal level. So about 25 municipalities out of the hundreds of municipalities in New Jersey have passed e-cigarette regulations, and we were one of them. We weren't the first, but we were among the first. So what we wound up doing was, at the time there were about 9 e-vendors in Princeton. We put in a fee for licensure. There's a fee for licensure for cigarettes in New Jersey, which is $50 a year, 50. We put in a multiple $100 e-cigarette licensure, and the first year, none of the vendors complained about it. They didn't come to the Board of Health meeting. They all paid it the first year, and then since that time, we've actually had a substantial decrease in the total number of vendors. Right now, at least based on what our health officer, Jeff Grosser, tells me, there are actually only 3 licensed e-cigarette vendors in the town of Princeton. There are laws currently in front of the Jersey legislature in this lame duck session. There are multiple laws to regulate e-cigarette access statewide, so that there wouldn't be municipality shopping for underage sales. The final point I'd make is that actually for decades, the Princeton Department of Health has participated in a national program that is implemented on a statewide and countywide basis of sending in young-looking humans, not people who are underage to purchase tobacco products, but people who, to anybody certainly in the 70-year-old age range, would think was a 15-year-old, sending them into licensed stores to attempt to purchase e-cigarettes. And we do that routinely multiple times a years to the legal sellers. And we, in the past year, I'm saying we, but it's actually the Department of Health, not the Board of Health, have identified violations, and the people pay a fee. And if there are multiple violations, there's other possibilities. We're in the process of rewriting our e-cigarette ordinance. We have a Board of Health meeting on Tuesday, and unless it is superseded by a stronger or a statewide law, we'll wind up modifying that town ordinance. We'll deal with flavors, and we'll deal with some other issues. Whether that, given that we're an island and you can go to other municipalities, the impact of that is not necessarily as great as it could be, but it'll be something that, at least something we can do in our town.
Can I just ask, I want to ask the school representatives, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about what you see in the schools in terms of vaping. So we have PHS, Stuart, and PDS.
In terms of, do you see any increase, decrease? Where do you see the students congregating? What's the educational programs that you're providing for the students regarding this issue?
Well, the health curriculum addresses vaping, JW and in the high school. There are different conversations that come up that I'm invited into classrooms to provide additional education. It's kind of on a class-by-class, case-by-case outside of the health curriculum. In terms of what we're seeing, we have our policy in place that we're really proactive in education. We address it as an addiction, not necessarily punitive. We need to look at, so an individual is vaping and they're addicted to nicotine. You can't just stop. That's not, there needs to be the education, what withdrawal symptoms are going to be like, how to educate families to be supportive, other resources outside, such as a Truth Initiative. Don't Get Vaped In program also has additional resources, finding the supports in the building for the student that might be outside of the counseling department, a coach, a teacher. So we're addressing it in the supportive environment, not necessarily punitive.
At Stuart, equally, we deal with it both middle and upper school through the health curriculum. That being said, I'm not aware of any students having been caught vaping, although having heard the same stats last year as this year, I'm certainly not naive enough to believe that doesn't mean I don't have students who do vape. And as we heard the other question about, like, how are you educating to catch the devices or find them? I mean, there's an aspect of the technology is always changing. The kids are going to find what they want to find. That goes throughout history. So, for us, really, the big question is, how do we educate the students to make wise choices? How do we educate the children to think before they do, kind of, at this age, press boundaries, to think about what are the safe boundaries to press and which ones are the dangerous ones? Because we have bright kids, and if they don't want to get caught, they're going to find ways of not getting caught. But it's how do we actually make sure that they're thoughtful before they act? And so, that's kind of what the ethos of the school entirely is. But on the vaping thing, we do certainly deal with it directly through the health piece. But overall, it's really helped. As a parent myself, how do you help your child think and reflect before they react? And that's something that's the kind of age-old, I think, parent battle to make sure we do that right.
So at the Princeton Day School, a big shout out to the student board members who are here. Woohoo! Our students can better tell you what we do to be proactive and educational about this substance and all the other ones. I would love to tell you that administratively and institutionally speaking, that it never comes within our purview or our campus, that we never worry or hear hearsay about things that happened over the weekend or after school or even before school, things that happen on the playing fields, on field trips, on school sanctioned activities. This is the life that our students lead, and this is unfortunately a risk that they take this day and age. So what can we do besides provide education, provide them the skills for good decision making, and to be, as adults, as mentors, and as facilitators for these conversations, to be as up to date and as accurate as at what we say. Do I believe the statistics that the Board of Health and the Department of Health has quoted today? Of course I do, because our kids tell us that all the time. When the student board sends out a survey to our high schoolers about drug use, these are the statistics that we see of those who are open and honest to actually even respond to those things. When we ask our 8th graders, what are these things? There's very few in that room who don't know what we're talking about. When the Princeton police comes and talks to our middle schoolers down to the 5th grade about these risky behaviors, there are very few in the audience that have not heard of these kind of things. And that's a little bit sad, but that's the reality. So to be able to support our community, to be able to support our students, we have to make sure that what we're talking about, what we're saying, and how we're approaching it gives our students and the next generation the ability to make the right kind of decisions.
And just to go along with what Dr. Shah was talking about, the leadership program, the Cornerhouse leadership program, they're all sitting here, and these are juniors and seniors in the 4 Princeton area high schools. And the power of the mentorship is really amazing, because what they do is they go to the elementary schools and the middle schools and high schools and talk about drug and alcohol prevention. They promote peace, anti-bullying, acceptance, and they also create programs for the teens in the area that are drug and alcohol free. And for the younger kids, just listening to their peers talk about the dangers of vaping, of addiction, and when they hear it from them, it's extremely powerful. And I think in terms of how it's related to what we're talking about today, they will come and talk to the kids, and I think that could be extremely useful because the kids would listen to them, and they're already learning about the effects of vaping. They're learning about the effects of addictions generally on the brain and the developing brain. And I think this is something that we should, all of us, parents, educators, should think about. What is the best way to transform that message? How can we best have, what are the best effects on our kids? And I think this program like this is a really great option.
Hi, my thanks go to Dr. Schroll, Dr. Steinberg, and all the panelists. I have a question and a suggestion. The slides were very informative, very educational. We learned a lot, thank you very much. But it seems that most of the scientific facts you provided are surrounded on nicotine. As Sir Michael Russell once said, that the smokers smoke from nicotine, but they die from tar. The accumulation of this gluey stuff in their lungs causing blockage, cancer, alteration, etc. So I wonder if you have any scientific results or research showing the results of the carrier substance or the solvent, the oil, in the people's lungs. It's very nice that you pointed out that it's not vapor, it's carousel. It's tiny drops of oil. The accumulation of oil in people's lungs, I'd like to know, is it reversible? Is it, what kind of damage, what kind of pictures do you have? That's my question. As for suggestion, my thanks go to the panelists. Again, you did a lot of work. When it comes to educating our kids, comparing the damage of traditional cigarettes and e-cigarettes is like asking them to choose between getting hit by an SUV or getting hit by a motorcycle or a sedan. Just let the kids know that choose none, or tell them that however less damaging the e-cigarette might be, it's never as fresh as the air itself. Thank you very much.
So in terms of health effects, I mean, we don't know for sure all the health effects. Clearly, inhalation of oils is not good. For the same point, that flavorings damage the lung tissue, oils damage lung tissue. The thoughts about how what this EVALI condition was originally thought to be lipid deposition in the lungs. It turns out it's probably not that simple, but clearly related. So I think we will learn in the coming years what all of the longer-term health effects are of vaping and e-cigarettes, and it's going to be, as it always turns out to be, it's going to be more harmful than we originally thought. That's usually how it plays out.
Just one additional thought on that. I was recently at a conference down at the National Institute of Health where that was focused on tobacco regulatory science. And you mentioned the idea of having pictures that show what's happening. And we don't have a lot of that evidence yet. It's just starting to get developed. But I do remember seeing a specific presentation that I thought was really compelling, and it showed there was a visual of somebody's lungs, somebody who was suffering from decreased lung function, a young person who was a vapor, and you could see that there were the depositions of fluids or oils was taking place that was not being cleared out in a normal way. So in more time, we'll probably be able to have pictures that depict that a little bit more vividly, but you know, we were seeing the first signs of that type of image.
I'd like to comment on that also to give perhaps what might be called a near-term warning on the health effects. The CDC, and as was noted, the CDC comes out with this information and morbidity and mortality report every week, so it's sometimes hard to keep up with these. But in the most recent one, they pointed out that with the flu season coming, they will no longer be looking at what are called community-based cases of E and vape-associated lung illness, because they just can't keep up. They don't have enough staff. So they will only look at hospitalized patients. But the point they were making is there are undoubtedly youngsters out there with a modest amount of lung damage. Not enough lung damage to send them to a hospital. Not necessarily even enough lung damage to for them to notice or for them to complain to their parents or to other people about it. But if you put influenza on top of that mild to moderate lung damage from vaping, we may see, I don't know that this is true, but we may see youngsters in this room or in our town who have vaped develop a combination of injury to their lungs. And this is the point where I say, even though you may have some doubts about the value of the flu vaccine, this is another reason, especially for young people and young people who vape, to be vaccinated against the flu, because you don't know, especially if you're vaping, you don't know how much damage has been done to your lung, and you cannot afford to have influenza damage on top of that vaping damage. It's hard. We still hover around 40% of the population of the United States that gets vaccinated for the flu every year. There are a lot of reasons why people don't get vaccinated, but this is a reason to get vaccinated, and I'll just leave that out there.
So speaking to the last two speakers' points, one of the things that strikes me as a practical measure, and I'm interested if there's any action on this, is there a way to regulate the marketing of these products such that we make very explicit the risks that are associated with the products that people are choosing to consume? It may not make a full difference, but it will avert some people from making a choice that they shouldn't be taking. One of the things that has always struck me as odd is that in certain countries there's a certain amount of the packaging that needs to have explicit messages in graphical format around the lung disease that these products are doing. It's tobacco. But we really need to look at this as not just an epidemic in this country, but a global epidemic, and we shouldn't pull any punches with regard to forcing regulation on these manufacturers for products that we know are harmful. I mean, it's been interesting to see the pivot. We saw one of the slides from a very cool type of marketing to now, are you interested in switching? And I think there's a case for that, and I think that's reasonable that this may be an option for some smokers. But we need to be very real with the fact that these products are geared towards a different demographic, and I'd like to understand, is there anything being done concretely where we can make this packaging very explicit, because that would be very powerful for the consumers.
Unfortunately, this is a frustrating topic, and you may know some of the history. We have this frustrating or stubborn thing in the United States called the First Amendment. And it's frustrating in the world of public health because corporations have, since 1976, increasingly been able to protect their commercial speech or advertising with the First Amendment. And there's been a series of lawsuits that have essentially, this is played out over a series of lawsuits. The most recent one specific to what you're talking about was a 2012 decision that struck down the FDA's initial attempts to require graphic cigarette warnings in the United States. The FDA recently proposed, and the FDA is the regulatory authority that really has the sole power to do this. And when I say sole power, it's conceivable that some jurisdictions might try to impose a graphic warning requirement, jurisdictions other than the FDA. The likelihood would be that they would lose a lawsuit based on a First Amendment challenge. Now, the FDA currently has a renewed effort after 7 years, after a lot of foot dragging, a lot of slow action. The FDA was actually compelled by a court to accelerate its process of proposing new warnings, and they did. They were released about 2 months ago. They will be finalized, I think, by May, and then there will likely be another lawsuit, and hopefully they'll go into effect. It probably wouldn't happen for another 1 to 2 years at the earliest. The law requires those warnings for cigarettes. The FDA has the authority to require warning statements for all tobacco products under its jurisdiction, including electronic cigarettes. And the only warning that the FDA currently requires for electronic cigarettes is something to the effect of warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. And based on the experience of losing the 2012 lawsuit and the other legal precedents that are out there related to this topic, I think the FDA was a little bit worried, maybe a little gun shy in terms of how far it could go in making that statement. And this happened quite a few years ago. This happened in 2016. So certainly before the youth e-cigarette epidemic happened, and before we had these acute lung injuries, even though they're not clearly related to electronic cigarette use, commercial over-the-counter nicotine-containing electronic cigarettes. So I don't see the FDA going that far for electronic cigarettes, at least until they win the cigarette warning lawsuit, if and when they win the cigarette warning lawsuit. So it's a frustrating thing. There's not a lot that you can do on that. There is a lot of education that can be done. Jurisdictions or advocacy groups can produce educational messages, put them on TV, put them wherever, but putting them on the packs is particularly difficult.
Okay, so what is like the school procedures when a student is caught vaping?
I think every situation is going to be a little different, so we have to treat each situation, but again, the ultimate goal is support, education, getting the student back on a healthy track, so whatever that may entail. Counseling, outside support, parent involvement.
Are you talking about specifically nicotine, or are you talking about more illicit? You're talking something like THC or
I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis with conversation, and depending on what they have, would be different conversations or follow-ups. Again, it's helping the student correct action and get on the best path, but like any situation, it would kind of involve conversation and discussion, investigation on what's happening, what the appropriate response would be.
Actually, Princeton Day School regards e-cigarettes, nicotine as an illicit substance because it is for anybody under the age of 21. So it is a primary offense for Princeton Day School, and every case is handled on a case-to-case basis, but that is a serious offense that requires not only disciplinary action but also counseling. We do have a stipulation in our handbook, both the middle school and in the upper school, for safe haven. So those are any student that thinks that they have an addiction problem, regardless of the substance, should they come forward, not be caught, but come forward and voluntarily ask for our assistance, we'll do our utmost to get them the services that they need.
Well, and again, I would comment as I did the first time. And I appreciate what all the schools have said, but this is a community issue. So at least from the Board of Health point of view, I don't see the schools as having the responsibility. And I suspect you were asking a different question. They definitely don't have the primary responsibility of getting students into treatment. They have an educational responsibility. They have a caretaking responsibility in the sense that we want to make sure the youngsters are safe while they're in the school. And it's an issue that the youngster and the family need to wind up dealing with. The reason I keep going back to that is that nicotine treatment can be very expensive, especially if, a lot of times it's not covered by insurance. And when I say very expensive, I don't mean, it's expensive to the extent of the family's resources. What might be not expensive to me, or it might be, well, it's the price of this cost of raising my children. To someone else, it might be remarkably prohibitive. So a concern I have when I hear people, when we're talking about getting people into treatment is, I wonder about essentially the social justice issue. It's one thing for a well-to-do Princeton family to find out that a youngster of theirs needs nicotine cessation therapy. It's an entirely different story if some youngster is a member of a family that doesn't have much resources. They have to get nicotine cessation therapy. I wonder how that's going to happen. I wonder how that winds up occurring, and that's what worries me.
Actually, to that point, having access for pediatric nicotine cessation is not just like, you know, Googling it on the internet. You know, any cessation program actually has multiple tiers. You know, counseling, group, individual, medication, and other behavioral modifications. And that actually needs to be tailored to the under 21 population, which, you know, does run the cost, the energy, the time, and the money for a whole family. As someone who sees children under the age of 21, having that conversation with the teen, the preteen, and their family is much harder than somebody who's been smoking 20-pack years for the, you know, and now they're in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. And so, and that becomes a hardship for everyone.
Can I just say that I think this is great that you're bringing this up, but I would point out, I'd like to refer people to the Tobacco Free NJ website, because all of the state-funded treatment programs, including including our program in New Brunswick, many of them are offering treatment that's free of charge. And they've all, since we've trained all of their staff, they've been trained, even though there's not a lot of evidence as to what is effective at helping younger people with tobacco addiction. They're all trained to deliver that kind of treatment. So I think as we get more people into treatment, we'll see the positive effects of it. So I encourage all of you, anybody who's interested in treatment, to
So Dr. Stein, let me ask you specifically, do you know if the Hamilton program accepts people under 21?
Yeah, they will. They will.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, it's not the most convenient. We're still at the point where we only have these 10 programs in the state, but we're getting there. So I think finding resources in the area.
Hamilton's not in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, it's
not that far away.
We just see here, just hearing what everybody said, that really all the schools are trying very hard to deal with this issue, and they're taking it very seriously. And I just want everyone to also be aware that there is Cornerhouse, which is as I said, it's a comprehensive outpatient treatment center. And we do see teens and young adults there, and it's a really great resource. And we work very closely with the schools as well. And we talk with our leadership programs about the importance of getting help and not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to share and talk about what we are experiencing and what we're feeling. And they know that if somebody does need help, if it's their friends or members of their community, they know that there are places to go, and Cornerhouse is one of them.
It's a community issue, and I love what Cornerhouse is doing, reaching young kids and providing an opposing, opposing force to the peer pressure of, this is great, you should try it, right? What about the schools? Are the schools themselves, PBS, GW, PHS, are they coming together? Are they sharing best practices on how to handle these issues and what's going on?
Yeah, so all the schools come to the Princeton Alcohol and Drug Alliance meetings, and we all kind of have a round table, and we all discuss what we're seeing, what the schools are seeing, what the administration is seeing, and everyone talks about what everyone's doing in their school. I see you guys all raise your hand for that.
We like to utilize resources that our peer schools have used in the past. I think that there's strength in numbers, and so seeing our kids interact through the Cornerhouse student leadership, and and then us as administrators and faculty through PADA monthly really brings the schools together so that we all can, as you say, talk shop, bounce ideas off of each other, brainstorm again for proactive programming as opposed to reactive programming, which we think is very, very important and which we hear from our kids is very important. And so we try to keep those communication lines open and honest.
Thank you so much for all the information. I think it's pretty shocking statistics that we've heard. This question is kind of like a question comment, perhaps even for the student representatives here, which is fantastic that you're all here. I really think that's great. And for the educators. So I have a son, I have two sons, middle school and high school, and we have discussions all the time. We keep it really open. I say, if you have friends who are vaping, they come to our house and they want to vape in the house, what would you say? They'd say, not in the house, And I appreciate that we treat it as an addiction, not being punitive, and something that we need to work together and counsel. But it seems that the stories I get are, well, Mom, I know which bathroom not to visit, or I know which bathroom more vapors are in, let's say, I don't know, whatever wing it is. So I just walk a little farther to the next bathroom, or, I go in there, but they don't bother me because I'm tall, or they don't say anything to me because, I don't look like I'm interested, or. So I just wonder, it's out in the open, kids vape, kids are vaping. Do kids amongst themselves talk about the fact that these things are kind of banished to the bathrooms and becomes a sort of like dirty little secret for people? And for educators, is there any talk about how to bring that out of the bathrooms and maybe into a space where it's just for the other kids so they don't have to feel like they have to walk extra 2 bathrooms over to not have to, be involved in that. It's hard to be supportive to someone in the bathroom. I don't know how to frame it. I guess you kind of get the idea of what I'm trying to say is looking at from not punitive counseling. In fact, how do we bring kids out of this sort of dirty little secret and we want to help you kind of situation.
For the kids that don't vape, they walk into a bathroom with a whole bunch of vapors, and that's uncomfortable for kids. They just want to go pee. They just want to do, go in and out. They don't have to sort through all the vaping that's going in the bathroom. And that's fine. There's no judgment. They just have to go to the bathroom. Or the kids that feel like I have the only place that can, handle my addiction is in this dirty bathroom. And that's sort of, I think, terrible too. There's sort of 2 sides to it. So do you guys talk amongst yourselves about, it must, as peer leaders, do you hear people say this is just like a crappy situation all around, right?
So I can speak to that. The kids are actually, I think they're so discreet that I don't go into a bathroom and find it myself. Going to the bathroom, I know what happens there, but kids, they'll go in stalls and do it, because you never know when a teacher is going to walk in, because at Princeton Day School, we don't have separate bathrooms for teachers, so it's not done that publicly, and your friends that do it, they do it wherever, and it's like, it doesn't really affect us so much in the bathrooms, because we just don't see it, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if I'm a little bit naive to it, I don't know if everyone knows the answer to that. When you're vaping, how long do you have to vape for it to feel like you've had a session or whatever you want to call it? Like when people just smoke, they smoke 1 cigarette, they burn it all the way down, and it's done. What is vaping like?
I would say it depends on your tolerance, like how much you use it. For first-time users, it would happen a lot faster when you ingest it, but for people that have become accustomed to how quickly it enters the bloodstream, almost depending on how much you smoke marijuana and things like that, it really just depends on your usage of it.
The way I viewed it was that this is something that was social also. So do you see groups of kids vaping, or is it more addictive and you see a single kid going into vape because he needs that, he needs it, or she needs it?
I think, or at PBS at least, I'd say it's less social because the kids,
the kids who are so addicted to Juul don't like sharing, and like why would they? Because they feel like they need it to get through the day because they're so addicted to the nicotine. So it's definitely more of a solo thing and very, very discreet at PDS because of the consequences that you heard Dr. Shaw talk about, how it's a primary offense, and everybody knows that because it's very common knowledge, but people still do it, obviously. So it's very discreet and more of a solo thing because crowds would obviously draw attention. And I don't really know about like party or hangout like Juul sessions. I don't really think that's a thing. I think it's more of a solo act.
We all know that, you know, we are in a different world. Things are available online. Technology's really changed the face of so many things. I really want to piggyback my question on her thoughts on, we know the protocol when a student is caught vaping as a parent. I want to really understand the mindset of a student who is struggling and who has already fallen under peer pressure and he wants to get out of it. I want to understand new initiative if school has, and that is being advertised or that's being you know, sponsored to the kids, or do they have core support groups within the teens that's available to them where they can go and freely talk, or how a school can help in non-punitive ways, as well as I want to understand that as a parent, if they find a kid struggling with vaping or substance abuse, what are their venues? If they want to confess, if they want to go, which is not detrimental to either a kid's academics or college, and a whole lot of procedures that we already know exist. Are there any new initiatives from the student perspective who's caught in this, as well as from the parent perspective in today's age?
I just think about some of our kids who we know who have a strong addiction to vaping, and they're pretty honest about their addiction and their struggles. But Michelle, there's a lot. You asked a lot of questions, but with our new policy, we're being a little more proactive. We're advertising the vaping cessation groups. Michelle has lots of strategies. Did you want to talk about a few of them that we've worked with some of our kids on?
Sure. I mean, they're mostly modeled after the Don't Get Vaped In program and traditional smoking cessation, where it's picking your quit day. We're using the Truth Initiative app for teens, asking the teen, can your parents be supportive? Can your coach or teacher or someone who else in the building is supportive? Once you pick the day, changing your pattern, changing, you know, how you walk to class, because it is a habit, waking up in the morning, what do you typically do? So it's a lot of thinking and planning behind actually quitting, on top of what are cravings, what's nicotine withdrawal like, headaches, constipation, getting everything out there, knowing what to expect, knowing that you can come to my office to get gum, knowing you can come to, you know, Mrs. Baxter if you need like that 5 minutes of, okay, I'm having a craving, I'm stressing, I'm sweating, I'm, you know, just knowing what's happening and knowing that you're going to slip up and we're still going to be there and come back and let's start over, and whatever additional resources are out in the community like Cornerhouse or peers, friends, just being there and understanding what's going on.
I just want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank our presenters, Kevin Schroed and Dr. Michael Steinberg, everyone on the panel. We got a lot of information tonight, and we're all still leaving with a lot of questions, worries, concerns. So really just do the research. You know, every day, any online newspaper, there's a new article on vaping. Schools put things out, Cornerhouse puts a lot of information out. Just follow it. Ask us at the schools. I don't want to speak for every school there, but I'm sure I can. Talk to your child's counselors, your principals, assistant principals, your student assistance coordinators, the nurses. There's a lot of resources and a lot of people willing to help and support you and support your children. So thank you very much for coming out. Once again, thank you to everyone who spoke tonight. Have a great next few days and have a great holiday weekend with your families. Okay? Thank you very much.